Wind scoured the black stone of Dragonstone until it sang like a distant harp. Spray leapt up the cliffs and turned to cold diamonds that clung to Jon Snow's beard as he climbed the steps carved by dragon talons and stubborn hands. The sea had the color of hammered slate beneath a sky that never quite decided whether it was morning or merely brooding, and the volcanic breath of the island came up in thin ribbons from fissures underfoot. Ghost padded ahead, spectral against the basalt, and looked back often, as if to ask whether they were wise to chase shadows across a dead king's home. Jon had slept poorly since leaving the north. Ravens had carried brief, careful words from Sansa. Roads secured, stores kept, watch set, and longer letters from Davos full of kindly counsel. Tyrion's letter had been the longest, if most evasive, a cork bobbing on a sea of politics. But it was none of those that had called him south. It was a rumor he had pretended not to want, carried in a smuggler's mouth at a dockside in White Harbor and paid for with coin and silence. A tale of doors beneath Dragonstone that had never been opened, of a vault drilled into the living mountain when Aegon Targaryen still whispered to dragons and drew new borders with his sister queens from a saddle of burning bone. The fisherman who had told the smuggler had swum as a child in the warm pools near the caverns and scavenged brass and seashells equally from the Titterline. "My father said his father said his father," he faltered, glanced at Jon and swallowed. "Said the island makes doors in places if it remembers you." Jon brushed his fingers over the carvings. The marks were not like the gouges left by picks or chisels, nor like the patient handwriting of maesters. They were angular and fluid at once, a language of heat and pressure that might have been written in the belly of the world. When his skin touched a particular curl of character, the stone thrummed, just once, like a harp string plucked. A spark pricked his finger. Ghost growled, not in warning but in recognition, and pressed his nose to the seam. The hair along Jon's arms rose as if the air had turned to winter. He placed his palm flat against the stone, breath held, and a low sound rose in the wall, like deep water rolling in a vast cave. Then the seam unstitched itself with the lazy grandeur of a serpent waking. Dust fell in a fine curtain. The wall groaned apart and became two walls. Then the two walls slid back into the flank of the mountain and revealed a passage no human lantern had lit in centuries. The warm breath became a hotter exhale. His men shifted behind him. In the dark beyond lay not silence but something like waiting. He stepped through. The passage angled downward, stairs shallow and long, cut for feet that had walked when the world was daring itself to be new again. Painted dragons wound along the walls in ochres and charcoal and the kind of red that always looked wet. There were words as well, too few to carry the whole meaning, enough to tease at the mind. Aegon, Visenya, Rhaenys. Other names followed, Valyrian ones he had seen in old lists and family trees, some he had never heard. Beneath them, a smaller hand had scratched symbols that meant nothing until he put his hand to them and felt the quiver in the stone again. Then they shivered into sense. A cadence of warning, an instruction, and an oath folded together. Blood to wake the door. Fire to greet the sleepers. No crown without the cost. Jon did not say the words aloud. His men needed steel, not ritual. He lifted the lantern. The air grew hotter yet. Far down, the passage broadened into a circular chamber whose floor reflected light in ripples. He thought at first that it was water. It was not. It was glass. The dragon's version of glass, anyway. A surface smoothed and hardened by such heat that it held a sheen like the calmest sea. He walked out across it, footfalls whispering. Ghost's claws made little scraping sounds. In the middle of the chamber yawned a pit rimmed by a lip of black and purple stone shot through with veins of lighter hues. The lantern's flame leaned toward it, as if pulled. Jon peered over the lip. Heat rolled up. He saw not flame but a glow like the heart of a forge banked under ash. The pit was deep. He could not see the bottom, only the suggestion of slow movement, as if molten stone turned lazily like a sleeper in a dream. Around the pit's circumference stood 7 pedestals. On each, something rested under a sheath of tone that looked poured rather than grown. The shapes beneath were imperfect ovals. Eggs, he thought, because he was a man who had seen eggs in paintings and tapestries. and who had once ridden the sky on the back of a living collapse of night. Eggs, because he could not make himself think of anything else. Egg whispered the heat up his wrist and into his elbow. Egg breathed the room. He did not reach for them. He turned instead in a slow circle, letting the lantern find the rest of the chamber. There were alcoves containing things preserved by heat and dryness. Coils of chainmail that had not rusted, spears with heads like obsidian lightning, a sword hilt wrapped in cracked leather, its blade absent, as if it had been pulled from its scabbard and never returned. There were chests banded in black iron, sealed and sealed again with waxes and resins that had turned the color of dark honey. There was a bronze plaque fixed to the far wall. The words on it were Valyrian of an older flavor, with a rise and fall ancient poets had loved, and when Jon read them his mouth made the shapes nearly right. If my heirs forget their language, let the mountain teach them by heat. If they forget their duty, let the sleepers remain stone. If they come alone, let them leave alone. If they come with the seed of our blood and the names of the skies open. His palm was sweating. He wiped it on his cloak and looked at his men, who stood at the edge of the glass, unsure whether to take another step or back away entirely. One murmured a prayer. Another spat on the floor and immediately looked ashamed, as the spittle hissed and vanished. "Out," Jon said quietly. "Stay at the mouth. If you hear me call, bring the oil and the torches. If you don't hear me, wait an hour. Then close the door, and tell no one." They stared at him. He could read what they were thinking because he had been a soldier for so long. That a man you trust with your life is about to do something that feels like stepping off a cliff. But they withdrew, one by one, lantern light diminishing until only Jon's flame remained to paint the cave's old art in moving amber lines. Ghost did not leave. He sat at the edge of the pit, tongue lolling, and watched Jon as a mother might watch a child at the edge of a dock. Jon put the lantern down. He stripped off his glove and drew his dagger across his palm in a single practiced motion. He let the blood drip onto the rim of the pit and watched it steam. The stone drank it. A deep note sounded at the base of his skull, as if someone had struck a great bell far below. He remembered the first time Regal's shadow had passed over him, how his heart had leapt even before his eyes named what winged above, how some locked thing inside him had turned its face toward the sun. He remembered the night a girl, not a girl, had walked naked into fire and walked back out with 3 smoking bundles clutched to her breast. He could not make his mind stop there. He let it walk on to the ash and the throne and the knife that had stopped a war by starting a second one within his chest. Blood warm, breath steady. He placed his palm on the stone sheath covering the nearest egg. The sheath was not stone, not truly. It was glass, too, but of a different temperament. Dragonstone's glass, the old alchemy that had learned to harden and hold things beyond the reach of rot and theft and Teague's greed or Hightower's piety. Under his hand, it shuddered. Spiderweb cracks leapt across it. The chamber held its breath. The sheath sloughed off like old skin and fell in fragments to the glass floor, each piece singing a little as it settled. The egg revealed beneath was the size of a large man's torso and colored like dusk. Charcoal and moss and glints of wet green, as if it had been laid in a grove by some forest-born dragon. Its shell was not smooth but scaled, the patterning so fine that light got tangled in it. Jon drew his hand back, and yet could not entirely keep from reaching again. He did not know the songs the old families had sung to eggs to wake them. He knew only the little a crow from the wall had learned by listening at the doors of others. He knew heat, and he knew blood, and he knew that being alone can be its own fire. He lifted the egg with a grunt, muscles in his back answering like loyal hounds. He held it over the pit until the rising heat stroked his forearms and licked his scars, held it until the shell's chill eased under his palms and became warm, then hot, then almost too hot. He turned it slowly, feeling for some rhythm. The egg had weight but not dead weight. Something within it shifted in a way that was memory's echo or else a new movement that made his throat ache. He set the egg back down on its pedestal, careful as a man leaning a sleeping child into a bed. "Wake if you will," he said softly, and hated himself for the plea in it. He went to the next pedestal. This sheath came off easier, as if the chamber had learned how much force to apply by watching the first. The second egg was a red more brown than blood, like summer clay after rain. The third was as dark as night with storm-lit depths. The fourth showed flecks like stars caught in tar. The fifth was a muted blue with a gleam like a raven's wing. The sixth wore a pale sheen strange to any dragon Jon had seen, a bone white that made him think of frost and the things that had walked with it. But when he touched it, the shell was warm, not cold, and something in his chest unclenched minutely. The seventh, last of them, was small for its kind and dappled like a falcon's egg, delicate in markings but heavy in the arms. He bled on each in turn. He lifted each over the pit, feeling the heat rise and gather. He turned them slow as winter, then slower until time itself felt like a thick liquid he moved through. When he set the seventh down, the chamber was very quiet. The pit's glow had brightened by degrees. He could see deeper into it now, see Kerr. Ents twist and fold around one another like muscles flexing in the world's thigh. The egg's colors had grown saturated, their scales seeming to breathe. Nothing else happened. He breathed through the disappointment like a man breathing through a stitch in his side. Ghost rested his chin on Jon's knee. Jon stroked the direwolf's head. "It may take days," he told the creature, as if he had tutors at his shoulder and calendars to consult. He did not leave. He sat cross-legged on the glass, daggers of heat thrusting up through his boots, and watched the eggs. He ate when hunger gnawed, pulling hard bread from his bag and washing it down with water that tasted faintly of smoke. He spoke to no one. He slept in snatches, head tilted against his bundled cloak. He woke each time to the hiss of the pit and the soft clicking noises that stone makes when it is cooling or heating, and to the sense that the chamber had curled around him like a cat. On the third waking, he opened his eyes into darkness and thought the lantern had gone out. Then he realized the glow had red-shifted, so deep it was almost black, and that the movement in the pit had slowed as if some decision had been reached. He rose, joints complaining. Ghost stirred with a soft wuff. Jon put his palm on the nearest egg, the dusk-colored one, and felt warmth not of stone but of something like skin. He pressed his ear to it. The shell thrummed. It was not the harp-string sound from the wall. It was a heartbeat. He did not call for the men. He had no words with which to explain what one must be born to understand. He put both hands on the egg and breathed with it, letting his lungs find that new rhythm. After a time, he felt the life within shift and press. A sharp sound cracked the chamber's hush, the hard, clean sound of something giving way to something that would not be denied. A shard of shell broke upward, then another, the pieces tinkling like glass. A narrow snout thrust through, a tongue tasting the new air, then a head, blind-lidded but testing, and the damp, wrinkled grandeur of wings that would someday unmake cavalry. Jon laughed. Startled him to hear it. He had not meant to laugh. He had not thought, after certain rooms and certain ends, that he would laugh like a boy listening to summer rain. He steadied the struggling creature, thumbs firm along the jawline, the way he had seen a woman do in a great circle of fire beside a dead husband's pyre. The hatchling sneezed. Smoke curled from the little nostrils, and a heat like a forge blast rolled over Jon's wrists. He did not let go. He guided the wet thing free of its prison and felt how perfectly it fit the cradle of his arms. More cracks answered. Across the chamber, the blue egg split. A tongue of pale flame licked at the line. The star-flecked shell fell away like night giving to dawn. The small dappled egg made a delicate popping noise, quick as a robin pecking through snow. The white egg did not crack so much as undo itself in a long peel, like skin shedding to reveal a pearl-dull creature whose first breath looked like a prayer answered. When the seventh had struggled free, the pit's glow leapt, then dimmed, task done, muscles relaxed. 7 newborn dragons cried. The sound went up into the vault and came back down enlarged, as if the island reminded them that they were not alone, that the word dragon had always been plural even when a single shadow crossed a field. Jon crouched among them in heat that would have killed any man with a different life behind him. He looked like a bearded midwife in a red forge, hands blackened with ash and cut with thin lines where shell had bit him. Ghost sat, eyes narrowed against the glare, tail thumping once, twice, in a soundless benediction. The dragons were the colors of their shells, but all looked new in the way that real things always do after too much time spent in stories. Their eyes opened one by one, yellow as coals, blue as smoke, black as a mine at night, and found him. He spoke their names without thinking, and only after the sound had left his mouth did he understand them. Aegon's plaque had whispered more than he knew. The dusky one he named Duskbane, the clay-red, Ash River, the storm-dark, Thundersigh, the star-flecked, Night's Merit, the raven-blue wing of words, the pale Frostflame, the small, quick one with a streak along the spine like polished steel, Arrow. They came to him not all at once but inevitably, a tide of small hungers. He fed them what he had. Strips of salted meat and water dripped on tongues that already wanted blood. He did not cut himself again. He had read, in a place he had no business being, that the first flavors matter. He gave them patience and refused to give them himself. They hissed, offended, then accepted the new law as newborns do. The world is as the first great hands presented. The next day he called the men. They stood at the threshold, armed and alarmed, smelling of fear and religion. Some crossed themselves. Some smiled like wolves at a lambing. Wordless, Jon led them through what must be done. Screens built against drafts, meat hauled down from stores and from traps set in the hot shallows, vigilance against greed. For men are worse thieves than time and, above all, silence. He drew a promise from each in the old way, with oaths that disdained gods for the honesty of one's own name. He posted Davos's most trusted among them and sent the fisherman's grandson to White Harbor with a sealed letter for Sansa that said little and asked only that she trust his absence. When the letters went, the ravens took new routes. What had hatched in the mountain would demand food and knowledge and a politics the world had not practiced in an age. The last time, people had knelt because there had been no other sensible posture, and even then men like the gardeners had convinced themselves they were tall enough to stand. The reach had burned. The north had kept its old pride by bending lick. A pine under snow. That winter had long ended. Jon lay awake at night in the warmth of unnatural stone and thought of things that were not in songs. Taxes, training fields, what 20 thin harvests would look like if the sky went wrong. He thought, too, of a woman with hair like the flag for fire and eyes that had made him understand how a thrown blade learns to fly. The dragons slept in a cluster not like puppies, not yet interested in the ways humans think of women or men. When they dreamed, the pit's light surged and tiny puffs of flame leaked from their nostrils in little rhythms that reminded Jon of wind in summer grass. On the 7th day after the hatching, a wind shifted, bringing a different smell up the passage, the smell of salt and tar and focused intention. Footfalls on the glass announced more than one person. The sound doubled and tripled and the room made it into a ceremony. Jon rose, soot in his beard, and turned as the torches resolved into faces he knew too well to ever consider safely distant. Tyrion Lannister came first, of course, because he was quick to own bad news and quicker to claim any share in good. His hair was shot through with silver now, his eyes as sharp as a pin. Beside him walked Davos, whose face carried the expression of a man who has looked into a dark cupboard and found both poison and bread and must serve one without letting the other's smell cling to his hands. And between them, as if the room had conjured her from Jon's guilt and the island's faith, came Daenerys Targaryen, dressed not in white or red but in gray that made her look like the stern edge of a wave. Her hair was braided with unlit metal. Her eyes found the dragons and widened, and in that widening Jon saw the part of her no war had managed to cauterize. "You found them," she said. There was no accusation in it, only astonishment salted with comprehension she would not speak of until she could own it. "They found me," Jon said, because it felt truer and less like a plea. Tyrion drew in a breath that might have been a curse, might have been a prayer, and released it as a laugh because a Lannister understands the uses of a wrong shape. 7, he said, as if the number itself were a joke told by a drunk god. "You mean to give the Septons conniptions?" Davos looked at Jon and then beyond him, measuring the mountain's mood. "The men will need to build bigger pens above," he said softly, And the ships will need to fish different waters. The little ones will eat what young noblemen eat. Everything you love first, then the rest. Daenerys stepped forward without asking permission of the air or the room. One of the hatchlings, Frostflame, raised a wedge-shaped head and hissed, then stunningly was still. The queen held out her hand. Not to touch, not to demand. Her palm hovered. The dragon leaned, nostrils flaring, and made a sound like a kettle before boil. The air between them seemed to thicken with a kind of recognition Jon felt in his teeth. He swallowed a dozen words. He had cut them out of himself once before, on a floor of ash and consequence, and had lived since with the scar. Now, he found that scars sometimes sprouted new skin in shapes the body had not planned for. Aegon hid them, he said, to fill the space that would otherwise hold a different confession. For a winter he thought would come for dragons as well as men. Daenerys' mouth quirked. Aegon never hid anything because of fear. He hid things because he understood people. Her voice lightened, underpinned by something that could yet be mercy. He would have hated to watch fools ruin a good inheritance. "I thought you burned your way through inheritance," Tyrion murmured, kindly if in his own way. She did not take the bait. Her gaze went to Jon. "What do you intend?" Jon looked at the dragons. The dozy little tyrants, bellies rounded, eyes slit against light. He looked at the men behind him and the friends in front of him who had been enemies and might be again. He looked up at the ceiling where mineral constellations had patiently waited through some other family's songs. He felt, for a moment, the exact weight of the world he could not carry and the smaller world he might. "Not what was done before," he said. "Not a throne made of knives. Not cities taught to kneel so they will forget they have knees. If these live, they live to make hard things easier, not to make easy things crueler." He paused, searching the heat for better words. "The North cannot feed them alone, and the South will not feed them for free. They must be shown." He looked at Daenerys and, very briefly, let all the rooms they had shared flick through his face. "By us." Daenerys' chin lifted. Pride and caution braided there. "Us?" she repeated, as if testing a spice. Davos cleared his throat, because old sailors know the value of land. "The world is what it is above ground," he said. "Houses and harbors and the weak honored for how long they endure. But under it," he gestured to the pit, "there is always a flame that does not care about banners. If you mean to carry these young fires upstairs, you'll need a charter the wind can't tear and a map food will obey." Tyrion tapped the bronze plaque with a knuckle. "The old rules will make fine footnotes. We are writing new ones whether we admit it or not. And before you argue about titles and apologies, think of this. 7 dragons hatched by a man half the kingdoms believed to be a Stark and the other half a secret they weren't invited to. There will be songs and there will be accountants. Choose your poets carefully." Daenerys smiled in spite of herself. "And our stewards? Choose them like you would a gallows builder. Honest enough to measure the drop, clever enough to place it where it will do the least harm." The dragons chirred, impatient with human chatter. The small one, Arrow, scrambled up Jon's boot and onto his thigh with the insistent grace of a creature certain the world EXISTS to arrange itself around him. Jon lifted the hatchling and folded it back against his chest. The skin beneath the scales was hot as a fever and smelled of copper and pepper. He felt in that heat a demand and a promise and, beneath both, a question. The island held its breath once more, as if waiting to see whether these two people would learn from the last time the world had offered them a terrible gift. "Food first," Jon said, surprising himself with the plainness of it. "Pens above, then training. Not war. Flight. Routes along the coast where fishermen can show them currents and islands can teach them winds. We'll let the people see how their lives get better with dragons in the sky, not shorter." Daenerys nodded. "We will need to speak with the men who count grain and the women who bake it. With the lords who will pretend their horses scare easily and the small folk who walk at night when the watch drinks." Her eyes glinted. "We will need to make enemies, but we will choose them." Tyrion's mouth crooked. "And when the other claimants to history come calling, Blackfire ghosts in costumes, sellswords with banners sewn yesterday. Then we will unveil the second part of the plan. Not to burn them, but to starve their reasons. And if they persist? Davos asked, not as a challenge, but because men who have lost sons ask such questions. Daenerys's hand hovered over Frostflame again. Closer now. The hatchling leaned into it like a hungry cat and exhaled a ribbon of pearly heat that made the air wobble. Then, she said mildly, we will remember that a dragon's shadow can be as persuasive as its teeth. They stood there for a time not measured by any glass. Above them, the sea fell against the island in patient, tireless sheets. Below them, the mountains hard-cooled, then warmed again, keeping a tempo that did not heed kings. The young dragons dozed and woke, the cycle written in them so deep that no man's wish could erase it, only bend it toward a purpose kinder or crueler by degrees. Jon watched their breathing. He felt the word settle into a shape in his chest that did not feel like surrender and did not feel like theft. When they finally climbed back toward the light, the wind hit them like a blunt blade and the smell of the sea stripped the cave's perfume from their noses. The sky had chosen a mood. Bright iron with tatters of white like banners remembered by winter. The men above looked from Jon to Daenerys and then to the baskets that held what had been born beneath their feet, and made the faces of people who suspect history has put its hand on their shoulders. There would be raven-sent words to cousins and enemies, and there would be ledgers, and there would be nights when the dragons refused to eat because a cloud had passed over the moon wrong, and there would be strangers at the gate with offers of service and knives under their tongues, and there would be laughter behind hands when lords whispered that the north had become a coup. There would be riders to train and saddles to stitch and songs to scold into accuracy. There would be meetings where someone would say crown and someone else would say council and Jon would say bread first and watch the room learn to listen. There would be the problem of a throne made of wrong, waiting in a city that sent dreams up like steam and forgot them as fast. There would be children running to the shoreline when a shadow passed and pointing with the joy of frightened delight. And there would be mothers half scolding as they hurried after, unable to keep their own eyes from the sky. That night, before the first public flight, Jon stood alone on the battlements and looked north. The wind off the water cut through him and somehow sharpened him, like a knife whetted on a river rock. He thought of Winterfell's hearths and of Sansa counting something with her precise mouth and of Arya standing in a doorway without announcing herself. He thought of Bran, somewhere inside 1,000 eyes, seeing him now and not judging, only remembering. Shepherds learned that the smallest dragon liked to sleep where the grass grew taller, and put bells on their lambs accordingly. Sailors told each other about a blue flash scale seen briefly through a wave, and found that fear could become pride if you gave it a task. The old men on benches remembered without admitting that they had missed the sound even though they had never been alive to hear it. Children, as always, taught their elders how to speak the new nouns, without letting the older verbs break. And in halls where power had long kept company with polished stone and wine, certain faces tightened and certain hands tapped certain armrests. Gold moved.
Messengers rode.
A sellsword company in the disputed lands stitched a dragon to its banner upside down and declared the symbol theirs with an oath so complicated its own captain forgot the clauses by the time he reached the second vow. In Old Town, a conclave was called with an urgency the starry September had not seen since wildfire had last been fashionable, and men who had studied the properties of breath pretended to find it ridiculous that fire could fly. In King's Landing, the Iron Throne continued to exist, and the city around it continued to be itself. Mercantile when hungry, religious when shamed, savage when jostled. Jon learned the names of winds he had never needed before and the small signs by which a dragon with a full belly says so. He learned to let Daenerys walk ahead into crowds that needed her face to understand the bargain being made, and learned to stand beside her rather than behind when the bargain turned ugly. He learned the pleasure of saying no to men who had never heard the word and watching them chew it like a new food that would not kill them but would require practice. He learned, too, that 7 dragons are like 7 suns, similar enough to be mistaken for one another by fools, different enough to require their own disciplines. One evening, as the sky took on that hammered metal look the island favored just before night, Daenerys found him in the training field where Thundersai was learning to accept a harness. The dragon had opinions. Jon had patience, Both were sweating. "You ride like a soldier," she said, leaning on the fence. "You argue like a shepherd. And win like which?" he asked, smiling without looking at her. "A farmer," she said, and he liked her more for making that the compliment it was. She came into the field and put her hand on Thundersire's jeweled brow, and the big hatchling stilled in that way dragons did for her, as if she were a regular phenomenon, like tides. "The High Tower sent a letter," she said, soft enough that the word did not spook the beast. "They wish to host us. They have charts and numbers and fear." "Fear we can use," Jon said. She watched him with that amused severity that had once undressed cities. "What of your north?" He thought of Sansa's last letter, the one that had contained no counsel at all, only a drawing of a loaf of bread split open to show its crumb, next to a scaled sketch of a dragon's wing, with notes about yield and surface area in her careful hand. "My north," he said, like a man warming a soreness, "will feed what feeds it and scowl at anything that eats without cutting wood. I will bring them pelts and salt and roads that last longer than winters. I will bring them news and ask them for it. I will ask them to come south only when there is a thing all people must see to learn it." He met her eyes. "They will trust me if I trust them." "And me?" she asked, not because she needed flattery, but because rulers must practice the humility of knowing what they are asking. He did not answer for a time. Thunderside snorted and butted his shoulder with a damp snout. He steadied the impatient head, measured a breath, and said, "I will trust you when you choose the better hard thing. And when you do not, I will say so before the room eats the wrong food." She nodded, bright and grave. "Then we will speak to Old Town together," she said. "They will show us their books. We will show them the sky." They walked back across the yard in a silence that was not absence but the full space between notes. Above them, Arrow sketched a scrawny loop against the bruised light, then dove in delight at his own speed. A flock of starlings turned all at once, as if some mind had whispered a joke through them. On the parapet, Ghost stood, a white mark against the coming night, and watched the world he had chosen to keep with a calmness that did not come from thinking everything would be well, but from understanding that being there when it was not mattered more. The mountain under their feet thrummed its slow, indifferent chord. The sea sent up its old catalog of arguments, each wave a case made eloquently and always ignored. The new fires in their pens sang in their sleep, low and content. And over all of it, like a new alphabet written on an old child's slate, the dragon's shadows passed and repassed, teaching men and women how to read their lives differently. What had been hidden had woken. What had been lost had been found with cost. And the cost, this time, would be counted not only in ash and oath, but in bread and bridges and the long work of teaching a proud and frightened world to lift its face to warmth without flinching. Jon knew there would be failures. He knew there would be nights when the old hunger for a simple remedy would rise and press hot against his back like a viper ready to strike. He knew there would be rooms where men would try to hang old banners on the new frame until the thing buckled. But he had felt a heartbeat under his palms that had not belonged to him and had asked him, in that first insistence only the freshly born can make, whether he would keep time with it. His answer was not a speech. It was the work that began each day when the mountain woke and the sea cleared its throat. He would make of that work a kingdom no throne could fully own and no sword could fully ruin. And he would do it with the woman who had walked out of her own fire and into his, and with a wolf who kept the boundaries of an idea as if they were the edges of a forest he had smelled since he was a pup. When the first rain of the new season came, it hit hot stone and turned to steam with a sound like applause. People looked up and laughed and did not know why. The dragons beat their wings and scattered the mist, revealing shapes of ships and rooftops and fields waiting for hands. And in that brief clarity, before the vapor rose again and magic became weather, Jon saw the world not as it had been told to him, but as it could stand to be if given lungs enough to speak. He tightened a strap, signaled a flight, and together they rose to find the next line worth writing between sky and earth. The voyage south wore a clean path between anger and purpose. Sails swelled like ribcages in deep breath, and the dragons, too young for saddles yet, took turns riding the winds above the fleet, learning the manners of the air. Arrow learned to stoop and skim, delighted with his own speed, while Wing of Words had the patience of a reader and traced the serpentine currents with a scholar's focus. Frostflame kept close to Daenerys whenever she took the deck, head cocked as if to catch the measure of her voice. Thundersigh argued with the wind until the wind learned to accept his weight, and Night Smerit vanished in cloud and reappeared always where he could startle a man into crossing himself. Duskbane liked the dusk, and Ash River liked anything that burned. Old Town lifted from the sea like a great stone hive whose bees were accountants. The high tower rose from Battle Isle, layer upon layer of rings, crowned in a clear light fire that never smoked. On the day they came, the beacon burned bright enough to etch the sky with a column of steadiness. In the lower city, the honeycomb of markets and quays throbbed with motion. Boats swarmed like minnows around the keels of Jon's ships. Then the gulls went suddenly silent as 7 shadows unfurled, and the sound that replaced them was not silence but a held breath big enough to fit a city. They did not land on the high tower. Daenerys insisted on the training yard of Whispering Sound, a broad strip along the waterfront that fishermen and stevedores and washerwomen used when the day's work was done. To make a king come to you, show him his own ground in your hands. She said it without saying it. Jon wanted the dragon's first Old Town smell to be tar and bread and fish, not the incense of high rooms. The high tower sent Lord Leighton's son, a tall man with ink stains on his fingers and the worried smile of one who weighs every greeting for hidden debts. With him came 100 men not meant to look like guards but who held their bodies like drawn bows, and behind them, for archmesters in striped, chain-heavy cloaks. Their collars whispered as they walked, one medal for each discipline, a soft rain of knowledge that had learned to sound like weather. The dragons, penned inside a cordon of spear hafts and timbers set hastily that morning, watched with slit eyes. The small folk watched the dragons. Some crossed themselves sideways, as if unsure which god owned this spectacle. Children pointed with pragmatic joy. Tables that had seen lines of fish bleeding into the grain of wood now held maps pinned by stone. Sailors tapped a fingernail against the place where a hidden shoal always clipped the careless. A maester appended a symbol to the key and made a note to revise a text. A woman who mended nets explained to Daenerys how a rope taught wrong remembered, and Daenerys, whose hands had learned knots no book ever described, taught the woman a hitch she had learned far away. Archmesters peered at young scales and entered observations about weight and temperature and rates of breath. Frostflame ignored them all to watch a skinny girl weave reeds into a trap. Jon walked the line between fire and ledger. He liked the feel of it more than he expected. A young lord with a cloak the color of spring leaves requested a private word and offered the use of his orchards. Jon thanked him publicly and sent a woman from White Harbor and another from the lumber camps to measure, to ask how workers were paid, and to ensure that generosity did not come with a collar hidden under the apple boughs. He did not miss that the citadel kept a second pace beneath the first. At the edge of every gathering, a pair of maesters whose chains wore black iron links drifted like smoke and always found themselves near any cask left unlidded. Servants who had grown handsprings where ankles lived turned toward the same archway twice in an hour and wore the same plain rings. Tyrion Name learned them with that effortless theft of his, and Davos mapped them the way sailors map reefs. Not with outrage but with a pencil. On the third day, a glass candle in a dark room began to burn. Marwyn the mage, big as a mastiff and twice as cheerful, let its green-black light climb his face and smiled as it found old scars. He did not send a boy with a message. He sent himself down a corridor no one tended, to a door a younger man would have kicked. He said to the old woman within it, "Your lord will dream of dragons soon. He should know which kind will land." Malora Hightower, called mad made by men who mistook uncommon arithmetic for madness, looked up from a table where she had arrayed shells, feathers, stones, and a tangle of copper wire to make a map of a world no one has yet drawn correctly. "He knows," she said, as if stating the weather. "His problem is not knowing, it's choosing." Marwyn grunted, which for him was respect. "There's choosing, and there's choosing after 3 archmesters invite you to supper with cups that have sat in other rooms." Melora's smile was a thin knife with honest edges. "We will feed them the wrong cups," she said. "Then we will tell them they drank the right ones, and we will see if their hands shake. People do not burn a city by accident. Cities burn when enough men convince themselves the fire is righteous or far away. Jon would not burn Old Town. Daenerys would not burn Old Town. The dragons could learn patience if men showed them models. But fire has its pride, and so does fear. The supper that would have ended with ash instead ended with a learning. Leighton Hightower received Jon and Daenerys in a ringed hall whose walls had been carved with ships and storms so long ago that the wood itself had become a salt-white memory. Servants poured wine with the solemnity of prayer. Archmasters raised cups that clinked only slightly. The liquid within wore no scent a northern nose could name as wrong. Jon did not drink. He said to the man across from him, whose chain wore more black iron than any other, "A glass candle lit last night where the Citadel has declared for a century no candle may light." That man's lip took a moment to decide whether to shut. "Old wives and sailors," he said, and sipped. "Wives know more than we allow them, and sailors do not exaggerate about rocks." Jon set his goblet down. "Our dragons will never drink anything they did not help kill. We have decided the same." Daenerys, who had approached fury as a craft and now practiced mercy as a harder version, tilted her goblet to the light. "If there are those among you who choose to study poison rather than food," she said, mild as frost on a window, "know only that your research subjects have grown claws." She rotated the cup slowly and studied the reflection of the beacon in the wine. "You will be forgiven if you meant to test power. You will be remembered if you meant to test our children." The Archmaester with the lips set his cup down also. His hand shook. He had drunk before the others. Men who plan to win forget that they, too, can be spilled. Leighton Hightower, whose worry came from the arithmetic of how long a city can continue to exist, said, "We will apologize," and meant it. "And we will write new rules." They wrote them, not laws to put in gilded cabinets, but charter lines on rough paper, smoothed by palms that smelled of tar and wax. The charter of flights insisted first on bread, second on roads, third on water, and only then on trophies. A dragon scene where famine walked would carry food, not fire. Any road built by Hightower coin or Citadel influence toward the mountains would bear down on its ledger a matching road built toward the sea. Harbors repaired near Old Town meant icehouses repaired near White Harbor, and the work would be measured in years, not an afternoon's loop of a quill. The Citadel would observe in daylight and accept that the nights belonged to people who had learned breathing at a different pace. The day they signed the first page, Daenerys walked the Whispering Sound yard with a girl who had slipped past 3 lines of guards to stand under the belly of Thunderside and laugh like a bell. The girl's father, a cooper who had lost his wife in a fever and his son to the river that takes the reckless, stood back with his hands tight on the shape of a barrel stave in his pocket, as if Wood could think of a way to keep a child safe where a city could not. "What's her name?" Daenerys asked. "Karis," he said, and spoke the word like a man standing at the edge of a roof saying the name of the house. "She will need eyes for the sky and feet for the curb," Daenerys said. "Teach her the look of storms in bowls of soup. Teach her not to run toward any shadow, even the ones that bring stories." The man nodded and did not weep because men like that do not weep except when alone. When Thunderside lowered his head and breathed warm air across Karis's hair, the girl put her hand boldly on the great wedge and patted as if soothing a skittish mule. The dragons I shifted to find Daenerys and then Jon, and, finding them, tolerated gentleness from the small. News traveled. It became rumor, then policy, then planted field. Sansa's letters changed tone, less iron at their edges, more flour dust in the corners, and lines that drew barns and mills in the margins like slow, unarguable promises. Arya's letter came from nowhere with no address and smelled faintly of wet leaves. It said only I saw men with nets in the wrong place and nodded in a code that Bran had taught them when they were children, the name of a port near Duskendale where ballistae were being built by men who had never held a hammer before they were paid for this lesson. Bran's word arrived as a raven that did not land but circled until Frostflame lifted his head and called back. Later, in the night, Jon dreamed the North's perspective. A crow's black wing and the great faint geometry of fields, and beyond them, ships from the west with prows like knives and decks crowded with men whose prayers had never bothered a god because they sounded like orders. On the prow of the foremost stood a man with an eye the color of a brew, a sea and a smile like a hook. He sang to himself without moving his mouth, and the sea kept time with him specifically. Euron, Tyrion said when Jon told it, and said the name like a cough you don't want to let into your chest. He has always wanted a story he can end by saying only he understood it. If he believes that you and Daenerys have taken history by the throat again, he will try to loosen your grip with something sharp. Not King's Landing? Davos asked. King's Landing is only ever itself, Tyrion answered. He will want to deface the margin, where the eye does not look until the ink crawls. He will choose the place where we said we wouldn't burn, to make us show our teeth. They did not show teeth, they showed presence. The first raids along the Shield Islands were met not by a dragon's hunger, but by a dragon's shadow and a fisherman's knowledge of what nets can do. Jon and Daenerys flew low and slow along the estuaries at evening, arrow skittering ahead, night's merit flickering like a frightened thought, frost flame casting pale luminance that made water look like glass. The raiders saw the ribboned light draw their shadows long across the deck and forgot the angle of their oars. Behind them, in coves where old smugglers had taught their grandchildren math, boats slid out, nets hit water with soft punctuation, and when the Ironborn tried to loose, the rope's tangled wrists learned for boarding, not for being hauled. The first fights happened in Orslap and curses, the second in courtrooms that had forgotten what it meant to sit a man down and call what he had done by its true name. Jon did not put men on spikes, he put them to building. A captured reaver who had called all law soft and all mercy fraud found himself ankle-deep in clay beside a mason who had never seen the sea and now would learn its smell. When the tower they raised on a spit of rock took shape like a clenched hand, the reaver stood back, rubbed salt from his eyes, and muttered, "We used to make things once." Jon heard it and stored it away not for pity, but for any action that might make the next raid less inevitable. The faith prickled. Where dragons urge generosity in those who wish to own their glory, zeal feeds on the sense that others are changing the terms of righteousness. In Old Town's lesser septs, preachers scaled from the Black Iron Link's lecture about poison to sermons about the vanity of fire. In King's Landing, a cobbler's son with a voice that persuaded men their shame could be put to work found an audience among men whose hunger was older than their piety. He called dragons a test and men who admired them vain. He called Daenerys unrepentant and Jon something worse, because the worst thing a man can be is hard to name. Daenerys read the transcripts. Jon watched her face the way soldiers watch the sky before marching. "No," she said simply, to the look he was waiting to refuse. "We will not burn a priest. It is history's worst idiocy to set fire to a man for how he keeps his books with God. We will find his money," Tyrion added. Faith without coin is a sermon to an empty square. They found it, folding back layer after layer of saints of the Maritime Guild, until money laundered through sailcloth and candle wax resolved into 20 men in fur-lined cloaks who claimed to fear for the small folk and feared instead attacks. Jon went to them in person with Davos and a ledger. He did not bring a dragon. He brought a fisherman's widow and a miller's daughter and a stone breaker from the river, and let those three ask how many loaves each gold dragon could become in neighborhoods where a family counted a winter by the way their fingers turned and cracked. The men did not become good, but goodness is a luxury and compliance a necessity. They complied, and the sermons turned from dragonfire to temperance to mercy to silence to a new topic entirely: cleanliness. Even priests must talk to keep their mouths from eating themselves. The North sent men whose knees had never liked bending to anything but roofs and axes. They came with horses that snorted at salt and learned to bite it from their own reins. They came with dogs that disliked dragon smell and learned to ignore what they could not defeat. Sansa's envoys. Two women with faces the world would call plain and therefore miss until it found itself planned by them. Sat in rooms where high-tower rings and citadel collars glinted, and spoke about grant schedules as if they were speaking about winter, slow and certain and not meant to be dramatic, only endured. Arya came as no one. Arya spoke to shipwrights in river speech that had been listening in her head since she was small enough to hide under lists at Winterfell. She found a man with a book of plans he'd been paid to memorize and forget, and listen to him forget to forget. She found barrels of pitch rolled by men with uncalloused hands. She found a priest who said too often that dragons are not men and therefore men are not bound to them, and watched his left hand twitch toward an absent knife whenever he talked. She followed him to a room behind a room where a foreign woman with hair like a crow's oil and white palms read a charter from across the sea about a boy raised in secret whose blood would make dragons kneel. Arya lifted the window latch quietly and left, and the next day the woman forgot which words commanded and which words described and discovered that words used wrong get you no bread. Good news does not retire enemies. It teaches them better camouflage. Letters arrived from across the narrow sea, stamped with seals Jon had never seen and phrased in the polite arrogance of men versed in keeping books about other men. They congratulated and welcomed and made clear that any city worth the name must consider the price of salt. One spoke directly. The Triarchs of Volantis wished to loan coin for harbors, and in return, they would loan the idea of obligation. Tyrion wrote back W. Ithcourteous wrought in his quill and thanked them for their interest in the Charter of Flights, which restricted loans from any city that practiced slavery under any name. The Triarch sent back a blank page, which was more honest than argument. Ghost made a habit of sleeping where the maps lay. He seemed to enjoy putting his head on a place where men intended to move the world. When someone, Jon never learned who, got used to stepping over the white bulk and laughed, Ghost opened one eye and made the small soft sound that wolves make when they remember the size of stupid men and choose not to fix it. The dragons grew. They shed like thunder sheds water. Duskbane learned to fly just above the tree line and scare boars into running the way hunters wanted. Ashriver learned to light kills without wasting a tree. Wing of Words learned the spiral of the Hightower and loved it, floating up in slow, precise arcs and landing with a rumbling sigh that made men on lower rings look up without meaning to and find their hearts lighter. Thunderside broke 3 harness poles in a week and then stopped breaking them forever, as if the answer had at last gotten through to him. Knight's Merit learned the language of murk on the water and showed sailors where shoals moved with the tide that month. Frostflame learned restraint, blowing cool across stacks of hay and never once setting a field alight when a stray spark took in a wind. Arrow learned speed and then began to learn not speed. Jon learned saddles that did not bruise a breastbone or pinch a wing root. He learned how to tell a dragon no when its whole body said yes and how to accept that saying no could be slower than the need men had for quickness. He learned the courage not to demonstrate strength when a boy at a quay threw a stone that clicked off a scale and ran away in fright, sure he had killed a king. He learned that being looked at by 10,000 eyes could be less heavy than being looked at by one that hoped you had learned anything at all. There were mistakes. A barn burned because a boy wanted to show his sweetheart how fire writes names in the air. The boy lost hair and eyebrows and his hope of impressing the girl and gained a lifelong understanding that glory is a draft animal, not a pet. A cart overturned because a dragon shadow spooked a plow team. A woman broke her wrist and cursed Jon out with language he had never heard and loved her for knowing which place to send her anger. A preacher shouted things that made men nostalgic for cruelty. He got an audience of 20 and then 12 and then 5 and then went home to find a basket of bread on his step with a note that said eat first and then speak. On a morning when the sea wore that hammered iron look and the horizon had the shape of a thought sharpening, a ship arrived from the Stormlands with a red stag painted over a black heart and a messenger who began his message by declaring that he would say the words exactly and ended with a bow that made his knee crack. Gendry Baratheon, Lord of Storms end by the alchemy of oaths, asked to see the sky. He came not with lawyers but with boat builders, not with maesters but with blacksmiths, and the first thing he asked to be shown was not a dragon but a foundry. He was faster than Jon remembered and slower in a way that looked like strength. Daenerys studied him and found in his square jaw and long hands a man who had made more things than he had broken. "We will eat better if we work together," he said, simple as the head of a hammer. "Storm's End's harbor wants a dragon to test her walls. My men want to learn how to build catwalks that won't set fire when you breathe on them. In return, you can have the line of land from the river bend to the old watchtower for your breeders. No houses there but ghosts. The wind is right. Breeders," Tyrion murmured, as if the word were a cork popped from the bottle of a century and releasing a scent that had always been there, waiting. "We are indeed in the grown-up part of this mischief." Jon looked at Daenerys. Daenerys looked at the dragons and saw them differently. as future, as responsibility not only to the present city but to a city children would live inside a generation from now. Her mouth set in that way that meant she was making herself a house for a decision. Not a pit, she said. A cloister, place of learning. No beasts with broken wings over chained fire. A library, a forge for saddles. A nursery for meat animals that live decent lives and do not know fear as their first food. She looked at Gendry, and women to run it who will not be told their bodies are an inconvenience to policy. You will have them, he said, and meant it, because men who have lifted hammers learn the futility of promising what you cannot lift again. It was set. Storm's End gave land, Hightower gave ledgers, North gave grain, and the charter gained a page that said in better words that the future would be better if grown on mildness and worked by sweat that was not always blood. The place would be called Sky House by sailors and the Warm School by children and a dozen other names by men who must name a thing before they can decide how to hate or love it. At the first laying of the foundation, Malora Hightower came and placed not a coin but a shell in the first wet mortar. And no one mocked because sometimes a shell is more money than coin. Sansa did not come because the North keeps its pride by staying where it works, but she sent a loaf baked in the shape of a wing and a letter whose corner had flour in it again. Arya came not as herself but as a mason's boy with a limp who carried water with a gait that fooled no wolf and plastered the back of her neck with mud, so that her hair lay flat and no one's eyes lingered long enough to imagine her face. Bran did not come. Bran watched through crows and the slow, unblinking eyes of trees and smiled where no one could see a smile except anyone who had ever been a child. The first attack designed to make them betray themselves came at dusk, because men learned inside the Citadel's long shadow believed dusk grants permission for cleverness. Nets woven with chain and wet leather slapped down from a cliff above the training yard, weighted and slick. For a moment, 2 dragons went down hard enough to make the ground grunt and the men around them stumble. And in that moment the men on the cliff stood up with crossbows and launched the quarrels meant to make a world choose between mercy and survival. They did not fall as planned. The quarrels struck new-worked harnesses sewn with green steel rings smelted at Storm's End under Gendry's eye, and the quarrels glanced or stuck shallow and fell. And when the dragons bucked and flung the nets, the men on the cliff saw, not fire, which they had planned to martyr themselves beneath with prayers booming in their mouths, but a wall of air as the dragons drove their wings forward. Air hit the men with the force of a door kicked open by a winter wind. Men went back like leaves. A few went over, and one would have died if Ghost had not been there in an impossible place to show a man the difference between death and learning. He pinned the man with that careful weight wolves keep for pups when they must be carried without breaking, and the man lay looking into eyes that were less mercy than fact and began to weep from shock rather than fear. Daenerys did not order fire. She stood on the training field and raised both hands and, without shouting, called the dragons to ground. They came because she had taught them ground is not shame, only instruction. Jon walked to the foot of the cliff where the men were scrambling to pull ropes, and he began to climb. He climbed like a man who had learned ladders on frozen towers. He did not speak until he was close enough to see the mustaches of the men who had tried to write a story with martyrdom and ropes. "You will spend a year," he said softly, because softness makes men lean forward to hear and forwards means off balance. "In the Warm School, you will feed what you tried to trap. You will learn to braid rope that is not for killing and to cut leather only for harnesses that do not chafe. You will go home with hands that shake when a man says the word dragon because they will remember not fear, but work." One spat at him. Arrow hissed. Jon did not move. The man wiped his own spittle from his beard with a motion so weary it looked like surrender in reverse. A week later, in a quiet room where the new charter pages dried under stones to keep them from curling, Malora traced a finger along a line and said, "A net that does not close should be a law." She wrote it down. Tyrion nodded, amused and impressed in that way that meant he would pretend it had been his idea by tomorrow and, when credit came, would push it forward to the person the room least expected to own it. A year's worth of days ripened into a pattern men call peace only when they have forgotten the number of small conflicts it contains. There were food lines reorganized so that women did not lose an afternoon to the crush. There were fisheries moved a mile up the coast to watch the way schooling silver mapped the sea. There were marriages blessed under dragon shadow by septons who pretended not to enjoy the heat on their old bones. There were deaths, quiet and not, and the understanding that dragons did not make death new, only put it under a different light. There were births at the warm school to cows that had wandered from men's use and found new purpose. Calves who did not panic at the sound of beating air and would not run their own legs to splinters if a shadow fell wrong. There were boys who stopped throwing stones and started throwing lines into the water with more skill and more patience. There were also letters braided of thread and silk. One came from a Sellsword company that used to be called Golden and now called itself something pious and different. Their captain wanted to sell history back to itself. Another came from Dorn, written in a hand John did not know and signed with a name he did. The princess who had once loved a dead man's fury had learned, across 10 years of sand, to count. She proposed trade and trial in the same sentence and made it sound like romance. Daenerys read her letters with the expression of a woman measuring cloth. "She does not need to like me," she said, "only to understand that we will not dress her in a shroud or a bridal veil without her consent." The day the glass candle in Marwyn's room guttered and died, the mage smiled again. "They will learn the older way," he told Malora, who had come to sit in the green-black light and lay stones in patterns that looked like nonsense until they didn't. "They will send men with knives instead of words. They have already sent girls with questions instead of knives," Malora said, not as a complaint but as a proof of method. What did the candle show while it burned? Marwyn's big hand cupped the cooled glass with a tenderness he did not waste on men. A boy in Pentos taught to think of himself as a banner. A priest in Volantis with a brand that says flame but lives like a banker. A ship in the west riding low in the water for the weight of iron and men who fear nothing because their fear has been trained wrong. "Euron," she said. "Ghost in a man's skin," Marwyn corrected.
No, worse.
"A mouth that wants to eat a shape. He will make an offer not to us. He will make it to a wind." The wind came in from the west, as foretold, and it did not bring Euron on its spine. It brought men who called themselves his rivals and carried letters promising to help kill him if they were paid. The Ironborn are a country made of waves and impatience. Their rebellions are always meals eaten on the way to someplace else. Jon received the letters and wrote back a single sentence. "You cannot kill a storm by hiring rain." He went to the Aram school at dusk and sat with Daenerys on a wall still warm from the day and watched Ash River curl like a living coal on the threshing floor and close one eye and open the other against the coming night. "We should go north," he said. "We should go everywhere," she said, and rested her shoulder against his. He rode north with 2 dragons, leaving 5 in the care of people who would once have been enemies and were now not friends exactly but alleged allies kept honest by work. Thunderside carried him in strokes deep enough to make the sea pull and return. Frostflame kept pace and cooled the air with each exhale. The coast unrolled. The Shield Islands, the fingers of the Mander Delta, the wrecked rocks where sailors whispered the sea would listen if you preened it with the right words, Blackwater's open mouth and the simmering city beyond it he refused to look at for long, the cliffs that learned winter early, the salt lick of White Harbor's piers and Davos's quiet magic in how the men there touched their forelocks to no one and still managed to make him feel welcomed. The long, long ribbon of land cut by time and stubbornness until Winterfell climbed from the horizon like a promise fulfilled because no other shape would do. Sansa met him in the big yard with flour dust on her sleeve and the pleased smile of a woman whose ledgers had taught men to regret. Quietly, in their beds, a stubbornness that had gained them nothing and cost them all the attendance they had hoped to force. "You look like a man who has been riding a bellows," she said, and hugged him so briefly the smell of her hair came through like a memory before he remembered he was allowed to love what he loved. He walked Winterfell like a man tasting remembered bread and found that the ovens had been repaired and the walls, too, and more telling, the buttery had gained a second lock with the key kept by a woman who had not been born in any bed at Winterfell but now slept in one with confidence. He spoke to boys drilling with spears and girls drilling with numbers and learned the number of stores intended for Old Town and the Warm School, and Sansa showed him a map with pins and the bright thread between them and the patience between both. "Bran writes rarely," she said. "When he does, I cannot decide if it is a kindness or a cruelty. He writes as a man whose breath is taken by trees writes," Jon said, and Sansa nodded. Arya was not at Winterfell. She was in the Vale listening to a man whose voice smelted gold into cunning. John did not know this, but Ghost did, because wolves listen for the way air remarks on a person even when the person is not present. Ghost put his head in John's lap at night and sighed, the way a creature sighs to remind a man that a thing can be both right and sharp. Before he left, John stood in the godswood with his glove off and his palm on the heart tree. Its face looked less like a face than it had when he was a boy, or perhaps he looked less like a boy. The bark under his hand was cool and indifferent. He spoke to it anyway, not because he believed it listened, but because words put into living would change shape by the time they come back out. He told the tree about Old Town and the Warm School and nets that did not close. He told it about Malora and Marwyn and Gendry and the Hightowers who had decided not to poison a history and won the right to be proud of that. He told it about Euron and the man with the brand and the boy across the sea who would be told he was a story. He told it about Sansa's flower and Arya's wet leaves, and about Daenerys and the 7 lives that had looked at him with the expectation that he would be a parent more than a lord. He told it he would not burn Winterfell again. The tree said nothing. The leaves moved though there was no wind. On the way south he flew higher. Thundersire's back welcomed him into a rhythm he felt in his teeth. He thought of the first time he had ridden a dragon and how the air had been a refusal. Now it was an instrument. Frostflame did not race him and did not lag. She flew on his wing like a companion who has learned equality saves more lives than gallantry. They swung east without landing at King's Landing, skirting its bad air. The sky over Blackwater carried the scent of taverns and hopes set on small candles and the high, unreal spire of a hall where men debated money as if no outside existed. Jon did not need to smell the throne to remember what a room can do to men if it is made of the wrong metal. He looked instead south again, to Old Town's clear beacon and the idea that a light can say here without saying mine. As they came nearer, a runner burned up the road from whispering sound with the expression of a man who hates being the first person anyone sees. He handed Tyrion a letter and nearly fell over when Arrow landed behind him without a sound and stretched to investigate the smell of sweat. Tyrion read, blinked, and looked to Jon and then Daenerys and then to the dragons as if considering composing a prayer, perhaps to be sent to the nearest god with reading skills. "The Queen Regent requests audience," he said, and made the title smaller with a tone. "She encloses a promise of safe conduct and a threat of what happens to men who do not attend court when summoned." "King's Landing," Davos said, and sighed without being afraid. "It was always a low tide waiting." "They can come," Daenerys said. "We do not need to go." "Her letter says she is already on the road," Tyrion said, "with 50 men with polished boots and 10,000 with unpolished hearts." Jon thought of sermons and nets and the sort of man who would put rope around a thing he did not understand. "We will meet on ground that is not a throne," he said. "We will dine at the Warm School." It was high summer when the Queen Regent arrived with a procession that made small folk gasp and snort both. Gilt carriages that stank of powdered faces, banners held by men who held their shoulders like men who hold their own children rarely, priests whose eyes counted, and behind them, ships along the coast flying flags men had learned to fear for reasons older than their lives. She stepped down in a gown that announced expense and looked around as if expecting to see a trick and not liking tricks she had not planned. Her mouth smiled, her eyes measured. She and Daenerys crossed the yard to each other and kissed like actresses in a dumb show. Courtiers clapped with their hands, if not their hearts. Jon bowed enough to be respectable and not enough to be claimed. The dragons watched with the patience of cats, politely offered salad. "Your school smells like a kitchen," the Queen Regent said. "It is one," Daenerys answered, "and a stable and a nursery and a reading room. We teach dragons to use less fire and men to use more books." The woman's gaze slid to Jon, stuck, then slid away. "Your dog is not a dog." "He is my brother," Jon said, and Ghost, as if to do his part, yawned in a way that showed large, respectable teeth and then sneezed as if bored. They walked the cloisters. Children learning to read 2 alphabets looked up and decided that queens are less interesting than letters. A woman with a belly big with the next season's citizen cursed the heat and Daenerys offered her shade without condescension. The Queen Regent watched it all with the air of someone visiting a market whose goods she does not buy and suspects someone, somewhere, is making a profit she has not taxed. At supper she raised the subject she had crossed half a kingdom to raise. We will require a tithe, she said, and made the word sound like a towel held to a bleeding nose. If your creatures fly over my city, they will be charged for the privilege. If your men walk through my gates, they will pass through the counting house. The crown will name the price of this new safety. No, Daenerys said, as if cleaning a table. You do not say no to a crown, the woman said, testing contempt's sharpness on her tongue. I did, Jon said, remembering a room, and would not give that memory away to a table as a dessert. Tyrion leaned his chin on his hand. A tithe to teach children to fear the sky, he mused. You will make coin in the short term and enemies in the long. You should instead tax the men who stir fear. Find them. They will be the ones whose coffers are fuller when panic walks the street. Tax them until they learn sermons are expensive. The Queen Regent's mouth thinned. She looked at the dragons. She looked at the children. She looked at the men eating on benches under a sky that smelled of sea and promise and sweat and ash. You will come to the capital, she said finally, as if reciting a charm. You will demonstrate loyalty. We are demonstrating something else, Daenerys said. We are demonstrating usefulness. Loyalty cannot be eaten, Jon added. Usefulness can. She left with the promise to send envoys to measure grain and collect gossip. She left with the look of a woman who had not so much lost a battle as learned it had migrated to a field she did not yet know how to dig. Nights lengthened toward harvest. The Warm School produced a harvest of a different kind. 14 children who could feed a dragon without losing a finger, 32 men who could fly a kestrel's patterns with a raven and bring messages that did not require helmets to survive, ironworkers whose tongues had learned steel's other words, women who could stitch harness leather until the seams looked like lines on a palm that promised long life. The dragons grew again and then again. Their wings made the yard's dust leap and settle. Their eyes learned names and answered to them. They learned to play with one another without turning play to broken bone. On an afternoon like the first time you say a name out loud and like the last time you sleep stupidly late, Marwyn came to the yard and set a stone on a post as if setting a cup. He's here, he said, and then, because he was a man who believed in the motions of warning as well as its words, he stacked 2 more stones on top and balanced a fourth and flicked it with a thick finger. The tower fell. He grinned. Euron Greyjoy came as all men like him come, woven into a rumor tossed ahead of his sails. He sailed into the whispering sound with a ship that seemed to enjoy being wicked. His men sang without moving their mouths, and the song left a taste of iron on the air. He wore a smile like a hook. He disembarked without bowing and called the dragons birds in a voice that made birds nervous. Jon stood with Daenerys at his side and Ghost at his knee, and the city around them not as an audience but as a mass with its own patience and new pride. Euron spread his arms like a man offering an embrace others will learn was a stranglehold. A market, he said. Good. I came to buy. We do not sell children, Daenerys said. I have no use for infants, Euron replied. I want the idea, the banner. I will pay you in pain not suffered, yours or theirs, whichever you prefer. Tyrion stepped between them slightly and smiled the way a man smiles when he would rather be drinking and is instead about to do sums. Your currency is counterfeit, he said. You promise pain not suffered. That is a trick priests use and husbands. We prefer grain delivered and nets unbroken and roads not too muddy. Pain not suffered does not keep bread from going stale. He tilted his head. What will you pay that has weight?
Euron Loughead.
The sound had less joy than a dropped knife. I will kill myself later, he said. In some interesting way if you give me a dragon now. Ghost growled. The low sound that changes men's knees. The dragons lifted their heads. Arrow took a step that made the dust puff. Night Smerit unfurled his wings without lifting from the ground, and the sound of it shifted the air behind Euron's hair. The men on the ship stopped singing and started breathing. Oh, you cannot buy what you cannot keep, Jon said, and you cannot keep a thing whose first lesson is that no man owns it. Euron's eyes glittered like coins bent by angry teeth. I have owned many things men said could not be owned. You have held them, Daenerys said. There is a difference. He spread his hands. If not coin, then story. He looked at the people gathered, at the children on walls, at the fishermen pretending to check their lines and watching with the shameless honesty of men who know they are the point of a thing. He raised his voice. These people will tire of being told to work. They will tire of being told to pay for roads they do not walk. They will tire of being told a monster over their heads is a pet. He smiled and made his smile say what his words said. Desire me, not them. Give them a feast. Give them blood. Give them fear. It makes a better song. No, said a girl's voice, surprisingly near. It was Karis, the net maker's daughter with a new freckle on her nose. She had climbed onto a post to see and forgotten to fear losing her balance because she had learned how to fall. That song is boring. Men laughed. The sound undid the knot Euron had been tying out of air. He tried once more. He is a man who has sailed storms and knows that even when the mast splits and the sail shreds, the boat can still lunge for a harbor with the right steering. He took a step, and the movement had in it a flicker of his left hand toward a knife that was not on his belt but would be in his sleeve. The knife did not reach daylight. Ghost, who had been waiting for the world to remember he had teeth, stepped forward cleanly and set his mouth around Euron's wrist with a pressure like discipline. Blood appeared bright as a truth on lips that had told too many stories. Euron flinched and laughed through it and lifted his other hand to strike and found that he could not, because Arrow had placed his foreclaw on Euron's chest, and the weight of a young dragon's intent is a political fact. Go, Jon said. Go, and do not come back by sea or land where our charter holds. The next time you come, bring a pen and a ledger. You may hang your knives over your hearth and sing to them. Euron did not bow. He bowed in the way a man bows when his neck does it because his wrist is bleeding and his lungs remember he likes air. He backed away through dust and found his ship with his feet and left with the laughter of children melting onto him like an insult he did not know how to wear. You could have burned him, someone muttered behind Jon. He burned himself, said the cooper whose daughter had a freckle, and people nodded, because truth well-spoken saves more timber than any proclamation. Harvest came. It was good, then bad when rain ran longer than men had ordered it. The dragons dried fields by flying low until stubborn damp took the hint. A whale died offshore and men brought knives and caution and gratitude to the work of not letting rot become a lesson. A boy fell from a wall and did not break his neck because a woman stuck her body underneath to break the fall and broke her arm instead. The Warm School fed her until the arm knit and gave her work that did not require two hands for a while, and the city learned that justice sometimes looks like soup. Letters came from the Riverlands with a new seal and an old name and offered barges and bridges in exchange for protection against men, whose banners had been washed but not laundered. Letters came from the north with requests for glass and promises of lumber. Letters came from Dorne with recipes that did not require an orange to be sweet. Letters came from the capital with taxes phrased as gifts the same way a punch can be phrased as a pat. Daenerys read until her eyes blurred. Jon flew until his shoulders ached and then did it again. Tyrion joked until his jokes wore thin and then sharpened them like knives. Not for throats but for knots. Davos learned the names of every woman who kept a ledger and a broom in the yards and never once pretended he didn't care which woman did what. He cared more than men who run cities need to, and the city loved him for knowing that love is as practical as rope. The first egg laid at the Warm School was the size of a man's head. It came from Ash River and was darker than his shell had been, patterned with a subtle current of heat that made holding it feel like holding thought. They placed it on a pedestal of stone, not chained but braced. The charter wrote a new page. No egg will be claimed by a house. No egg will be put to auction. No egg will be sold for a favor. All eggs will be named by children whose hands have learned to wash after feeding and before. The children named the egg Bright after because it had been laid in a dawn that had broken early after a storm. The adults did not change it because adults learn after enough failures that children sometimes know which names last. They held a festival not to dragons but to bread. Men who would have come to see fire came to get slices. A man who had arrived prepared to hate any symbol that stole eyes from his own cause found himself chewing and nodding and buying a second loaf because the first had gone with his hands before his mouth had finished arguing. A septon blessed the ovens because he had eaten their work and cannot in good conscience call demon what feeds a child. A red priest stood at the edge and called any fire his. No one listened because his fire had never baked them a crust. When winter's first scout walked up the river in a coat of fog and a temperature that made men exhale and look to their cloaks, Bran's raven came and sat on the mast at the warm school and said in the voice of wood creaking in a frost, "North." It showed a vision of a ridge where trees had been cut and not replanted by men who did not think the next season would come. It showed a shadow moving under the snow like a fish in a white river. Jon went. He did not go with an army. He went with a dragon and a sled and 3 men who could smell weather and a woman who could listen to snow. The ridge was where Bran had shone. Under the skin of late frost lay a road. Men had dug it slyly and then covered their work and waited for spring to make their treachery look like geology. It led not to the wall, which had learned to survive even after its worst day, but to a hollow where iron lay arranged like a promise. Bolts and chains and the means to take a dragon by the neck if the dragon should land and find itself momentarily astonished. And in the hollow sat a man who looked like a priest but smelled like a banker and said with meekness, "I am only a steward." Jon looked at the chain. He looked at the priest. He looked at the trees that would not grow back until after this man's grandchildren had forgotten why their breath hurt. He did not kill the man. He required of him a list of names and the names those names owed and the names those names feared. He burned the chain. He poured the iron as if it were water into channels cut by a woman who listened to snow, and the iron cooled into shapes children could climb on and call a game. At night the priest tried to flee and stepped into a patch of snow that had frozen thin. He fell and did not break through to water because the water had decided not to take him. He lay there until morning and then walked back and told Jon the name of a man in King's Landing who paid for bolts with money that smelled faintly of incense. When Jon returned south, he found Daenerys in the warm school with bright after under her hands, listening. He put his hand beside hers. The egg was warm, not hot. The warmth was as much promise as it was heat. "We will not be kings," Daenerys said, not because she was proud and not because she was ashamed, because it was true and it needed saying aloud to make it real. "No," Jon said, "we will be parents." "Worse," Tyrion said from the doorway, raising a cup, "we will be stewards." Davos laughed and shook his head and muttered something about sailors ending up building barns. Malora arranged a handful of shells and a feather and a coin and a nail on a table until their shapes told her something and then got up and went to find a child to teach it to. The world was not saved. The world was not ruined. The world turned, and in one corner of it 7 lives that had been hidden grew into their wings, and 2 lives that had broken once learned to bend without snapping, and a city learned to count its bread in shadows and its shadows in bread. The high tower's light burned clear. The citadel's collars whispered knowledge. The north sent flower and furs and a silence that meant respect. The sea beat its arguments against stone. The dragons beat theirs against the air. At dawn, before any lesson or ledger, Jon stood sometimes on the wall of the warm school with his hand on an egg and his other hand in the fur on Ghost's neck, and listened. He listened to the way heat makes stone talk to itself. He listened to the way breath stacks inside a building when sleeping creatures have taught it to respect the weight of their lungs. He listened to a woman's footfalls behind him and knew who she was without turning and felt the shape of the day change its angle to accommodate her laugh like a ship shifting tack to make the wind a better helper. When bright after finally cracked, it was during a storm that had arrived too early and too loud and had sent children and old men running indoors with the joy of fear properly measured. The shell split not with thunder but with a sound like a stitch snapping. The small snout pushed through. The scrap of wing wrestled against a world that would fight back. The room filled with the smell of pepper and copper and wet possibilities. Children cheered and tried very hard not to clap because they had been taught the first thing a child hears should be breath, not noise. Jon lifted the hatchling. Daenerys put a hand under his hand as if the world were a heavy bowl. The storm outside said rain. The beacons said here. The charter said bread. The dragons said more. The people said ours, not to own, but to keep, which is the only ownership that does not need a chain. "Welcome," Jon said, to the small weight that made his wrists ache with joy. "Welcome," Daenerys said. to the longer work of making a life a school. The hatchling sneezed, blinked, and fixed on Daenerys first, because a newborn sense knows the first light it sees. Then it turned to Jon and tasted the air near his throat and decided 2 was a right number. Ghost wagged his tail once. Outside, the storm's edge frayed, and between rain and sun a piece of sky tore open, bright as a promise kept.